Hey everyone, in this video, I want to talk about migrating your Cherwell database from Microsoft SQL Server to Postgres. But before we get into it, I want to remind you again that every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, we host the Cortex Users Group. Whether you're running on Microsoft SQL Server or Postgres, or not even running Cortex at all yet, we'd love to have you come talk about Cortex, ask questions of your peers, of us. It's basically an hour that we've set aside to host a conversation between whoever has questions, whoever wants to know more about Cortex and everything that we're doing, both in previous versions of Cortex, in future versions of Cortex. And Anyone is welcome, no matter where you are on your Cortex journey. If you're just starting out, or if you've been using Cortex for years. Um, And if you can't make it in person, well, virtually to any of the Cortex Users Group calls, we also have a Discord server, and links to both can be found in the video description. So with that, let's talk about how do you get your shareable data into Postgres? Now, Microsoft SQL Server and Postgres are both very solid, very stable databases, and they're both, I would say, enterprise. Right? Obviously, Microsoft SQL Server is very popular in enterprises, but Postgres is probably the most analogous database engine out of all of the open source ones. Postgres is open source, like MySQL. Actually, you could argue it's more open source than MySQL, but that's a topic for another day. We need lots of time to talk about that one. Um, but again, it's a solid database server, and it bears many similarities to Microsoft SQL Server. Coming from Microsoft SQL Server, you'll find Postgres very familiar. However, it also comes with its own opinions, and some of those are actually in direct contradiction to some of the assumptions that you might be used to from Microsoft SQL Server. One being table names, another being full text indexing, and that sort of thing. So when the problem was posed to us, can you run Cortex on Postgres, specifically on shareable data in Postgres? Um, we had to do some digging. We had to figure some things out. And there are a lot of good utilities out there that will copy your data from Microsoft SQL Server to Postgres, but you won't necessarily get it in the same format. There may be some expectations and assumptions that you have to leave at the door when the data moves over to Postgres. One of the biggest ones being that by default, Postgres likes lowercase table names. It's not impossible to have table names with capitals in them, but a lot of the data migration tools just kind of assume that you want an idiomatic Postgres experience. And change the names, basically change the names of a bunch of your tables and columns and that sort of thing. And for us, that was a no-go. Yes, we could work around it, but we really wanted a one-to-one. We wanted the tables to be the same with the same names. Um, it would end up working a lot better for the Cortex code, and it would be a lot more familiar for you. So what we ended up doing was just building our own migration utility. And I want to show you that in this video. So it is a command line utility. We don't have a GUI for it. The main reason that we made it command line is it was a lot easier to be cross-platform. You can see, obviously, I'm running on a Mac. My dev environment is a Mac. We also have plenty of people running Cortex on Linux and running Cortex on Windows. Most people are running Cortex on Windows, but if you're using Postgres, there is always the possibility that you might just be using Linux. So we wanted to build one utility that would be useful on all platforms. And it actually turned out that we already had a command line utility that we've been using internally. Um, and we call it cortex-util. And you can see my uh, terminal here is suggesting that I type it because I use it so frequently. So let's actually go ahead and run it and see what it does. Well, it's not found because it's not in my path. It's just in this local directory here. Now you can see it actually has a few different options. Again, we've been using it internally for several different things. Um, we actually built our own ZAR importer. Again, I'm running on a Mac, so I can't use system restore. Um, so I built a little ZAR importer that allows me to take those Cherwell archives and restore them to a database. It definitely takes some shortcuts. It is not exactly the same as the system restore utility. So if you're looking to restore a Cherwell system, I recommend using the system restore utility. But been using this to restore the ZARs that you send us. If we run into a question about your content or there's a particular issue that we're trying to solve and you send us a ZAR, we use this utility for two reasons, actually. One is because I'm running on a Mac and I can't run the system restore utility. And the second reason is that the way we've designed this utility, it actually restores in the exact same way that it was in your system. So it doesn't do any farewell upgrades to it. So it exactly the way the defs and the configuration are on your system is exactly the way that we are testing them on our system to make sure that we can replicate the issue, exactly. Now, so enough about that. Let's talk about migrating a database, which is actually that other command, this one down here, this database command. And I'm actually going to type, uh, we'll have to do cortex-util, and then I'm actually going to paste, where did it go? I had a command all ready to go on my clipboard and it has disappeared. So let's try this again. All right, got that command copied. Let's paste it. And you can see, yes, I have some passwords in here, but these are all to my local machine. So don't worry about that. I'm not giving away secrets. Um, Basically, the database command has a migrate subcommand, which takes two parameters, dash dash from and a connection string, right? Dash dash from and a connection string, dash dash to and a connection string. The from connection string is a connection string to a Microsoft SQL Server database. So you can see server equals 1433, a UID, a password, a database to copy from, and multiple active result sets equals true and encrypt equals false might not be required, but it's probably a good idea to have those in there. Let me just hide my face for a second so you can see the whole thing. And then, of course, you have a to connection string. The to connection string has to be a Postgres connection string. So you can also see server localhost because I'm copying from localhost, sending to localhost, username and password, and then a database. And I'll create it in Cherwell demo. So let's bring my face back. And then I'm going to hit enter. And while it's running, I'll talk about what it does. Well, it actually didn't like it. Well, apparently my Postgres database isn't running. So let's go ahead and fix that. So you might get nasty errors like this. Usually, the very first line gives you an indication of what's going on. So my SQL database is running. Let's get my Postgres database running. Um, they're both running on my local machine. They happen to be in Docker containers on my machine. But anyway, okay, now it looks like they're running. So let's try that again. Go up and run it. Uh, that is actually a good point. The database actually has to exist. The script does not create the database. So I'm actually going to run this against a database that I have created. Cherwell 2 happens to exist. I know that. And now we should be able to get going. And Yeah, so now you can see it's starting to migrate the data over. So basically what it does is a few things. First, it creates all of the tables that it finds. Then it migrates all of the data from those tables. And then it creates indexes. And it creates the indexes that it finds in SQL Server. It doesn't, well, it does also use what it finds in Cherwell. But to start with, it creates all of the indexes that it finds in SQL Server. The reason for that is that lots of systems have custom indexes that have been applied at the database level and aren't applied through Cherwell. So we didn't want to lose that. Uh, if that's the case, those will get pulled across first. Um, and some of the tables obviously have a lot more data, so they might take a little bit longer. Um, just because it stops running or you don't see any activity here doesn't mean it's hanging. It does create the data in batches of, I think, 1,000 records. So, for instance, trebuchet defs will take a while. It'll especially take a while because I'm recording at the same time. So there are fewer resources for the migration to contend with. But it will copy all of the data across, again, in batches of, I believe, 1,000 records, and then create the indexes. And then in a minute, hopefully not a literal minute, but in a little bit, we'll see it will actually start pulling across the indexes that were created in Cherwell, configured in Cherwell. Anything that it didn't pull across from the SQL Server to Postgres direct migration. Um, and it will also create the full text indexes, again, based on what it finds in the Cherwell configuration. Again, because full text works very differently in SQL Server versus Postgres. Now, because of what it's doing right now, you can actually use this utility for any SQL Server database to migrate it into Postgres. And the table names will be exactly the same. Uh, in the next step, basically what happens is if it finds the trebuchet tables, the Cherwell tables, then it starts doing Cherwell specific property processing. But if it doesn't find them, it doesn't do any of those. So if you have a bunch of Microsoft SQL Server databases that you just want to migrate over to Postgres, you can use this utility as well. Um, Again, it'll keep those tables named exactly the same with the proper case, with the proper uh, data type. Um, it'll look like the exact same tables. In fact, I've gotten confused when I have them both open in my database viewer um, because they look exactly the same. I have to wonder, am I in MySQL land, or sorry, MS land? Am I in Postgres land? Um, yeah. So here we go. It's all done. So you can see it's validated indexes, and that's what we say instead of creating indexes, because some of the indexes have already been created because they were copied over from Microsoft SQL Server. And then configuring text search for the tables that have text search supply. Now, as you're scrolling through this output, you might see situations where, for instance, especially an index wasn't created successfully. I think in this output, I saw one here. Yeah, so there is actually a limitation of Postgres where index names, which confusingly it also calls them relations, but index names can only be 65 characters long, maximum 65 characters. Um, so some of the longer indexes, the longer index names, we truncate, and that means that there might be name conflicts. But anytime there is an issue like that and the command can't be run, we print out the command that we were running. So if you really need this particular index, you can run this command and just change the name of the index to something different. Obviously it truncated it at links underscore, so anything after this wasn't being used. So basically make the new name shorter than that. Just run that command at your Postgres console, and you'll be good to go. It should work just fine if you need that index, right? A lot of indexes were created specifically for use with Cherwell, so you may not need all of those indexes. So this is a long video. This is a command line tool. Hopefully this is pretty straightforward. If you have any questions at all about this, let us know. Come to the Cortex users group, visit us on Discord, um, ask us all about this, and I hope this made sense. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.